And now could we turn to Dr. Baker? What does Black Lives mean to you? Tell us a little bit about how you can promote inclusion and working together with the Black community, please.
Yes, thank you. First and foremost, I'm pleased to be here, and I'm glad I'm the final speaker, because what I've heard from my two colleagues really does resonate on a number of levels, from pre-conversion to Islam, what Jodeci was saying about being in a predominantly white environment. That happened to me when my parents took me out of my urban secondary school and placed me in a Roman Catholic school. I was Roman Catholic before I converted. So that experience that you had, feeling like you were an alien in the playground, I know that feeling. I also liked what Dr. Archdeacon, what you've spoken to as well, because when I was in the Roman Catholic Church and I was looking around particular denominations, I went to C of E, All Saints Church in Tooting, and was looking at some of the grappling with issues of identity in the church. And I really respect, I think you're one of the first, apart from I think it's Justice Welby, his name, speaking so transparently about the challenges. And I've not heard an archdeacon speak to that like you have just in these few moments. So kudos to you, and I really appreciate that. That resonates with me. From my perspective, I think that as a convert Muslim, there are obviously challenges there within the faith as a convert, as a Black convert as well, because we experienced in embracing Islam a lot of anti-Black racism from the more predominant South Asian and Arab communities. And I speak to that. And as former chairman of the Brixton Mosque, which was the first convert-led mosque in South London, Black convert-led mosque, there were a lot of issues that we had to deal with as in a microcosmic sense and on a macro level amongst the wider community. I think that the racial inequalities that we are talking about, I think Archdeacon just mentioned this now, was instead of looking outwardly, first and foremost, we need to look inwardly at our own faiths and what is taking place. And I think we need to talk from some theological and historic perspectives, because in there being a sense of belonging, and in us being able to have validity in speaking to our congregations and audiences, we can no longer obfuscate or cloud over issues of our history. For example, prophecy. Jodeci mentioned something about Black Jews. I remember as a 10-year-old child watching something amazing on live on television, and that was the Falasha nomadic Jews in Africa being airlifted to Jerusalem. So that was, for me, that was an indelible print that stayed with me until adulthood, to see that well, he mentioned I think the European Jews, but that there was a multitude of Black Jews in this instance. I think also we need to sit to those and let the congregants and those Muslim, Christian, Jewish, those of no faith, know the multiplicity of prophethood and what our Abrahamic faiths are underscored by. For example, the stories of Moses. And we see that whilst the message is being delivered in many of these in our faiths, what's not being spoken about are those relatable aspects. So for example, knowing that Moses was Black is significant in the climate that we speak to and discuss today. From the Muslim perspective, knowing that the first emigration, the initial emigration of some of those who were being persecuted, they went to Abyssinia, to a Christian established society who took them in, who they sought refuge with. And this is a story that I relate to the Muslim communities, so they can see that Islam first spread on the African continent before Asia and Arabia. So I really do feel cultural aspects, physiological aspects need to be addressed by the Abrahamic faiths, so that there, again, I reiterate that relatability for those who are looking for guidance, for those who are concerned about what they're witnessing now. It cannot just be the spiritual message that we're calling them to and obscuring what is between the spiritual message and reality. I think that's the 5 minutes, and I hope I've addressed that issue. And I will conclude on the point that Black Lives Matter, the cause, is what we should all be focusing on. There are a myriad of agendas political, socio-cultural, socio-economic, and otherwise that are at play at the moment. And we should not lose sight of the cause Black Lives Matter, because when we start bringing in other elements, what we then see is that there's a diminishing of the main cause. There's a conflation with everything else, and it all comes under an umbrella. Yet we have seen anti-Black racism and systemic racism against Black populations for centuries, but it keeps getting diluted by these myriad other causes that are bolted on. And we need to continue that sole focus, I think, at this stage on Black Lives Matter, the cause.
Thank you very, very much for that. Where do I start? Wow, there was so much in that. Thank you very, very much. The first one, do we think it's enough for the corporate sector and even faith institutions to adopt a diversity strategy? What would that look like? Who would like to answer that?
I'll give that a go.
Thank you, Dr. Abdul.
I think it's a very complex question and has different tiers to it. And I think when we look at corporate entities, there are so many challenges there as well. We're talking about equality with regards to gender as well, which is a challenge and a problem there. Women being able to rise up the executive ladder in the same way as men, and equal pay and things like this. And it's unfortunate that we need to have policy and legislation that can protect or facilitate equality and justice. And we've witnessed this from the 70s when we had the Race Equalities Act and everything introduced in order to preserve the rights and protect the rights of minorities. I think that there does need to be some sort of policy development around corporate structures, because they don't seem to be doing it themselves. The main focus with them is profiteering, the main profitability. The main focus for them is to maintain a career track and path for particular elites who have emanated from particular institutions or elite academic institutions. So I therefore think policy will be an important can play an important role in ensuring that equality in diversity is what takes place. But we don't want what we were seeing in America, I think in the 80s, 70s and 80s, of this affirmative action, because one thing that I think all of us want as minorities, as Black people as well, is we want to be awarded and achieve positions on our merit. I would never like to go into a position because it's affirmative action and they were lacking one or two Black faces, so therefore I've got into that position. Because the perception of my colleagues and peers in the workforce will be that he is not equal, he's not the same as us, but because of this policy, he's being placed in there. So I'm speaking against what I've initially started to talk with. Ideally, it should be merit-led, merit-based, but we are not living in ideal times. So it's a difficult one to move forward with. Religiously, I think, again, it should be easier from a religious perspective, from a social religious perspective, because we are people of faith. So therefore, our conscience should be that which leads us. And in order for that to lead us, one thing I think that unconscious bias that Dr. Rosemary spoke about is amazing that this has been raised. Thank you for highlighting that. But I think that we also need to become aware, or make others aware of their privilege. Because as Joe Decky initiated and mentioned earlier on previously, that when someone has a privilege and then those who are asking for equality start raising their voices, those who have a privilege then think that they're the ones being oppressed, or that the equality is actually oppression towards them. So people of faith need to have their conscience stoked, poked, without there having to be new legislation to say, let other minorities raise up to particular ranks and hierarchy within our faiths.